The sun hadn't risen yet, but Mark Henderson was already awake. The icy wind seeped through the cracks of his old farmhouse on the edge of Ashfield, Indiana. Inside, silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint clink of a spoon against a coffee mug. Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring into the steam, willing it to fill the space where his dreams used to be. 3 years ago, everything had been different. He had a wife, a steady job, and a plan for the future. But cancer had taken Rachel swiftly, cruelly. The medical bills buried them, and the grief buried Mark. Now, all that remained was him and Emma, his bright-eyed 6-year-old daughter, who was far too wise for her years. Today was payday, or it should have been. The job he was counting on got canceled last minute. His bank account held $11.42. The fridge was nearly empty, and the car, his rusty, wheezing 2002 Honda Civic, was running on fumes. He looked out the window at it, sitting crooked in the driveway. That car was his only lifeline. Without it, there'd be no work, no groceries, no chance. But then Emma's tiny voice rang out from the hallway, chipper and trusting. "Daddy, are we still in school and work today?" Mark forced a smile. "Of course we are, Bug. Let's bundle up." After dropping Emma at school, Mark headed out of town toward a possible gig, patching up a fence for an old neighbor. Just past the gas station, he spotted her. A woman, maybe in her 30s, stood on the side of the icy road, waving frantically. Her coat was thin, her shoes dusty, and her suitcase had clearly been dragged across some long, rough miles. Mark slowed instinctively. He had no money, no gas to spare, and a daughter who needed him. But he knew what desperation looked like, and this woman was drowning in it. "Need help?" he called from the rolled-down window. She nodded, breathless. "I missed my ride. I need to get to Eastwood. It's important. Please, I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent." He hesitated. Eastwood was 30 miles in the opposite direction. He didn't have enough gas to get there and back. But something in her voice, earnest, raw, chipped away at his fear. "Hop in," he said, against all logic. "I'll take you." Her name was Alina. She barely spoke during the drive, but when she did, it was with grace and gratitude. Mark noticed her hands trembling, not from the cold, but nerves. She kept checking her phone, wiping her eyes. He didn't ask questions. Sometimes people don't need saving. Sometimes they just need someone to say yes. When they reached Eastwood, Mark's gas gauge was deep in red. He pulled up to a tiny cafe near the train station. Alina turned to him. "You just saved me. I know you didn't have to, especially with a kid at home. Thank you deeply." She scribbled her number and name on a torn napkin, Alina Vance, and pressed it into his hand. "I promise I'll find a way to repay this. You have no idea what you've done." Mark gave a tired smile. "Just make it to wherever you're going." Before stepping out, she looked him in the eyes. "You have a kind heart, Mark. Your daughter is lucky." With that, she was gone, swallowed into the crowd. He watched her disappear, heart heavy, hoping his last tank of gas had at least given someone a second chance. He didn't expect to hear from her again. The Civic died 10 minutes outside of Ashfield. Mark had to walk the last mile home, boots soaked, hands frozen. Emma greeted him at the door with her usual warmth. "Daddy, I drew us today. We're superheroes." He held her close. She didn't need to know their fridge was nearly empty, or that their only transportation had finally given up. That night, curiosity gnawed at him. He unfolded the napkin and typed the name into his phone. Alina Vance. The screen loaded slowly, then lit up with images, business magazines, news articles, TED Talks, CEO of a global tech firm, philanthropist, Forbes 40 under 40, net worth in the hundreds of millions. Mark sat there stunned, phone glowing in the dark kitchen. He had just given a ride to someone the world already knew, but he'd met the real her. Scared, alone, human. Still days passed, then weeks. Nothing. Life returned to struggle. More odd jobs, more skip meals. He sold the Civic for scraps, borrowed rides, took the bus when he could afford it. But the hope, that fragile hope, never quite left him. It was a month later when the roar shook the neighborhood. Mark was walking Emma home from school when a low rumble overhead made them both look up. A private jet was descending, not toward the distant airport, but toward the field near their house. Neighbors gathered in confusion. Who lands a jet in Ashfield? The aircraft touched down on the makeshift dirt strip, engines powering down. Out stepped a woman in a navy coat, surrounded by a small team. Mark froze. Emma tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, isn't it your car, lady?" It was. Alina Vance walked through the field like someone coming home, straight toward Mark. "I told you I'd be back," she said, smiling, eyes shimmering with something between joy and disbelief. "And I told you it wouldn't be in your Civic." Mark blinked. "You flew a jet here?" She grinned. It was the least I could do. They sat on Mark's front steps, Emma between them, eating the cookie Alina brought from Paris. "I was running away," Alina confessed. "Not from anything illegal. Just my life. It stopped feeling like mine. That morning you picked me up, I had walked out of a boardroom and told no one where I went." Mark listened quietly, nodding. "You didn't know who I was, but you gave anyway. No questions. No judgment. That changed something in me." She reached into her bag and handed him a folder. Inside were papers, job offer, housing documents, even a letter addressed to Emma. "I started a program," she said, "to support people like you, hard-working, unseen, underappreciated parents. You're the first." Mark's hands trembled. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she said gently. "There's a job waiting for you at one of our local offices. A new place to live. And Emma? She's got a scholarship lined up. All because you stopped on the side of the road." They moved a month later. A beautiful 2-bedroom home with central heating, a backyard, and neighbors who smiled. Mark became facilities supervisor at one of Alina's community centers. Steady hours, good benefits, respect. Emma enrolled in charter school where she made friends and finally had a warm coat that fit. The Civic was gone, but in its place sat a modest hybrid, courtesy of the Alina Foundation. And every few months, a sleek black jet touched down just outside of town. Sometimes it brought supplies. Sometimes it brought people. Sometimes it just brought Alina, dropping in for dinner with her favorite family. Emma grew tall and brilliant, just like her mother. Mark watched her walk across her high school graduation stage with honors, his eyes wet with quiet pride. When she spoke at the ceremony, she didn't talk about grades or college. She talked about kindness. "My dad taught me that sometimes the smallest act, like stopping your car for a stranger, can change the world," she said, "because someone did that for him. And then she changed ours." Alina sat in the front row, smiling. Mark looked around the crowd, many of whom had been touched by the program Alina created, now operating in dozens of towns. He'd once given away his last tank of gas, and somehow it turned into a future. Sometimes the universe waits for you to give even when you have nothing, just to show you how much it can give back. Let me know if you like a printable version, voiceover script, or storybook format. Absolutely. Here's the next 8-part continuation, part 9 to part 16, of the story, deepening the journey, expanding emotional depth, and showing how kindness continues to ripple forward through generations. Mark never sought attention for what he'd done, but word spread. Local news picked up the story of a single dad who gave away his car to help a stranger, and how that stranger came back in a jet to change his life. Soon, others reached out. A retired teacher in Tennessee, a young mother in Ohio, a mechanic in Idaho, all touched by Alina's program. Each of them nominated by someone who once received help from someone else. What started as a thank you turned into a nationwide movement. Alina named it the Henderson Project, after the man who reminded her that real success wasn't measured in dollars, but in decency. Mark wasn't a millionaire, but he was rich in ways that mattered: dignity, purpose, and the love of a daughter who knew her father had changed the world without even realizing it. Emma didn't just grow up with love. She grew up with vision. At age 12, she told Mark, "I want to be someone who helps people the way Miss Alina helped us." By 15, she was volunteering at shelters, tutoring younger kids, and organizing coat drives every winter. "No child should ever be cold like I was that year," she told her dad one night while folding donated scarves. Alina saw the fire in Emma and became her mentor. She didn't offer shortcuts, just guidance and honesty. You don't have to change the world overnight, she told her. You just have to leave people better than you found them. Emma carried those words in her heart like a map. Life, however, is never a straight line. During Emma's first semester of college, on a full scholarship funded by the Henderson Project, Mark collapsed at work. Doctors diagnosed him with an autoimmune condition. It wasn't terminal, but it meant he'd need to rest. No more lifting, no more long shifts, no more handyman heroics. Emma wanted to drop out and come home, but Mark, even from his hospital bed, refused. I gave up enough for us to survive, he said. Now you've got to live. That's the deal. We don't go backward. So she stayed. She studied harder. She called him every night. And with every word, they reminded each other what resilience really meant. One cold February evening, while clearing out the attic to make room for a home care nurse, Mark found an old envelope tucked inside one of Rachel's journals. Yellowed, sealed, and addressed, "To be opened when you need hope the most." His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was Rachel's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, life's probably knocked you around. But I know you always get back up. I want you to remember this. Emma is our light, and you are her lighthouse. Even in the darkest storms, she will find her way back to you. I'm proud of you. Keep going. Love, always. Rachel. Mark cried for the first time in years. Not because he was broken, but because he knew he was still whole. That same year, Alina faced her own test. After years of public service and growth, she was offered a government position, one that would mean greater reach, but also political compromise. She wasn't sure she wanted it, so she did what she always did when the noise got too loud. She flew to Ashfield. Mark, pale but smiling, greeted her at the door. Emma had baked a pie. They talked late into the night. Alina asked, "What if I'm not the right person anymore?" Mark simply said, "You're still the woman who stood by a snowy road and believed in second chances. If that woman's still there, she's the right one." She took the job, not for power, but because of people like Mark. Years later, Emma stood on stage at a ceremony where her name was now on a new scholarship, one not for her, but for first-generation college students who had once lived below the poverty line. "I know what it's like to skip meals," she said to the audience. "But I also know what it's like to be seen, to be believed in, and that can change everything." After her speech, a young girl in the front row hugged her and said, "I want to be like you someday." Emma smiled. "You already are." On Mark's 60th birthday, Emma gave him something that made his jaw drop. There, parked in front of their home, was a restored 2002 Honda Civic. His Civic, the same one he had sold for scrap years ago. I tracked it down. "Took me a year," Emma laughed. "Figured it was time he came home." The seats were reupholstered. The engine purred. But the dent on the right door was still there, his favorite scar. He got behind the wheel, tears in his eyes. "I thought I lost everything that day." Emma smiled. "Turns out that car wasn't the end. It was a beginning." One sunny spring afternoon, Mark and Emma stood outside a community center built with funds from the Henderson Project. On the wall was a mural, a man in a rusted Civic, handing the keys to a woman in need. Below it, a quote read, "Sometimes the smallest act of kindness become the biggest moments in someone else's life." Mark Henderson. Children played. Families laughed. Inside, fresh meals were served, job coaching offered, and stories shared. Mark stood quietly beside his grown daughter, hand in hers. "Dad," she asked, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped for her that day?" He nodded slowly, every now and then. And he smiled. "I thank God I did." Years later, Emma, now a young woman with purpose in her stride and love in her heart, walked into a university lecture hall, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. The auditorium was packed. The topic, the power of one small act. She shared her family story, From a struggling single dad in a tiny Indiana town, to a woman in a jet, to the community programs now helping thousands across the country. When the talk ended, students stood, applauding through tears. A girl approached afterward, holding a scholarship application in trembling hands. "I thought no one saw people like me," she whispered. "But you did." Emma leaned in and said what her dad once told her. "We may not choose where we begin, but we can choose where we go from here." Mark's health had its ups and downs, but he kept going, gardening, reading, helping with the local shelter when he could. People in Ashfield didn't see him as a man who once struggled. They saw him as the man who never stopped giving. He never bragged. He didn't need to. His life spoke louder than words. On one quiet autumn morning, with leaves drifting outside and the smell of coffee in the air, Mark sat in his favorite chair, watching the sun rise through the window. When Emma entered with breakfast, he looked up and smiled. "It's a good day, kiddo." And it was. It always had been, because he made it so. On the 10th anniversary of the Henderson Project, a crowd gathered near the same field where the jet had once landed. It returned that day, sleek and shining, but not for fanfare. Alina stepped out, now silver-haired but radiant. She walked over to Emma, who stood beside a new mural. This one of Mark holding Emma as a child, both smiling. This was always a story. Alina said softly, "We were just lucky enough to be part of it." Emma took the mic and spoke to the crowd, her voice steady, proud. "We're not here just to remember what happened. We're here to keep doing it, to pass it on." From a single act on a snowy road, hundreds of scholarships bloomed. Thousands of jobs were created. Millions of meals were served. The ripple Mark started touched corners of the world he never saw, but always carried his name. In a school in Kenya, children learned English in the Henderson Learning Center. In Detroit, a shelter bore the words, "Always room for one more." In a small village in India, a mother whispered thanks in front of a clinic funded by the Henderson Project. Kindness had gone global, and it all began with one man, one civic, and one impossible decision. Emma found it years later, tucked inside the original napkin Alina had written her number on. On the back, her father had scribbled a note in faded ink. "I didn't have much, but I had enough to help. If this changes nothing, I still did the right thing. But if it changes everything, then let it begin here." She read it every year on his birthday. And every year she whispered, "It did, Dad. It changed everything."